Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the store, along with my wife, Melissa Muscatine, who's right there. And we are extremely pleased to be hosting Carol Leonnig and Aaron Davis, who are here to talk about their much anticipated new book, Injustice: How Politics and Fear Vanquished America's Justice Department. You know, Carol and Aaron were colleagues at the Washington Post and about as dogged and successful in ferreting out stories as they come. In her 25 years with the Post, Carol won a Pulitzer 5 times, once for her revelatory coverage of was for her revelatory coverage of misconduct and security failures within the Secret Service, and 4 times as parts of Washington Post teams. She's also written 3 great previous books, Zero Fail, about the Secret Service, and 2 on Donald Trump's first presidency, co-authored with her Post colleague, Phil Rucker. Recently, she left the Post and is now a senior investigative reporter for MSNBC. Aaron, who's been at the Post 17 years, has won a Pulitzer twice as part of teams investigating the January 6th attack on Capitol Hill and the sexual harassment by Roy Moore, who ran for U.S. Senator from Alabama. Aaron's also been a finalist for the Pulitzer 3 other times, so he's on a roll. Now, in their book, Carol and Aaron take on one of their most ambitious stories yet, recounting what they describe as the subversion and erosion of the Department of Justice over the nearly the past decade. The process in their telling started with Trump's first term, as he sought to bend the venerable law enforcement agency for his personal and political gain. Though he subsequently failed at that, Carol and Aaron contend his efforts succeeded in destabilizing the institution's foundations and weakening its resolve. Then under Joe Biden, Attorney General Merrick Garland assumed office determined to reestablish historical norms and avoid any appearance of partisanship. But Carol and Aaron portrayed department officials as proceeding too cautiously in building the case against Trump for attempting to overturn the 2020 election. The author suggests Trump's targeting of prosecutors and FBI agents in his first term likely played a role in the department's hesitancy. The book provides a lot of detail, scene after scene, of prosecutors and FBI agents arguing over whether and how to proceed, preoccupied initially on prosecuting the January 6 rioters while only belatedly pursuing the fake electors scheme that implicated Trump. And by contrast, you may remember the House Select Committee bore in on Trump's role. And in the case of the classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, Special Counsel Jack Smith is depicted moving aggressively, but making a questionable decision to file the criminal charges in Florida instead of Washington, a decision that backfired when the case ended up with Judge Aileen Cannon. Now, as we've seen this year with Trump's return to the presidency, DOJ has become more or less a tool of his and an instrument of his vengeance against critics and those seen as having wronged him. Reading Injustice, it's hard to see how all the damage ever gets undone. But even to begin to think about reconstituting a nonpartisan, fair, and professional Department of Justice requires understanding in greater detail what happened to get us to this point, which is the aim of Carol and Aaron's book. In conversation with Carol and Aaron, we're very fortunate to have someone with a voice many of you will recognize, Mary Louise Kelly, co-host of NPR's All Things Considered. She is herself the author of a memoir, It Goes So Fast, and 2 novels, Anonymous Sources and The Bullet. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Carol, Aaron, and Mary Louise.
Well, it's obvious from the crowd that there is absolutely zero interest in this topic, that y'all have managed to pick a topic that's not remotely timely for this book. Aaron, Carol, congratulations. Welcome. We're here tonight to weigh the conclusion that you all reached in your reporting, which is spelled out in the subtitle, How Politics and Fear Vanquished America's Justice Department. Vanquished. Not to scare the bejesus out of everybody before we've even gotten going, but I would submit the stakes could not be higher. We're talking about the rule of law, and whatever your politics in the room tonight, whether you love what is happening at the Justice Department or hate what is happening at the Justice Department, or like me, are struggling to keep up with what is happening at the Justice Department, if we want this country to remain governed by the rule of law, we need to pay attention to what people inside the Justice Department have been telling the two of you. So there's a lot of detail, as Brad just mentioned, in the book. With our limited time tonight, I'm going to hit a few key moments in the chronology. I want to ask the two of you a little bit about how you source a book like this, and then we'll open it up for all of your questions. Sound like a plan? All right. Take us to the moment when you two set out to write this book. It was 2023. Carol, what was happening?
Okay. Is this mic working? No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hold it up.
First off, thanks to Brad, Politics and Prose. Thanks to Mary Louise for a series of questions that I know are going to be sometimes hard to answer, but just her being here and having dove into our work is a huge honor. Aaron and I worked at the Washington Post together for many years, and we're still colleagues in many ways, though I've left the Post. But we had a tip in 2022, and we almost didn't believe it. The tip was that there was no real investigation that had started for many, many, many months and into whether or not Donald Trump had engaged in a crime in trying to overturn the election. Now, we all saw in January 6th and in the events preceding it, openly Donald Trump egging on a fairly robust, you could say violent attack on the Capitol. And we saw evidence that looked like evidence of a conspiracy by his campaign to try to block the certification. But the Justice Department, we were told at the time, wasn't really digging in. So we began trying to figure it out, and lo and behold, the tip that we thought was upsetting was true. And we decided at the time, Aaron and I both scratching our heads, how can it be that an institution whose mantra is investigate evidence of a crime without fear or favor, how can it be that it chose not to look at this for more than a year? And that led us to working on the book and learning a lot more that was disturbing.
And you've just nodded to, there's a lot of detail in the book, which I encourage everybody to go through over what happened in the first Trump term. You chronicle in great detail January 6th, so great that I learned a lot from reading it, and I was anchoring our live coverage of January 6th on January 6th, and have been covering it ever since, so kudos. I will say one of the surprising chunks of the book, and it is a big chunk of the book, is the Biden presidency. And Merrick Garland comes in as Attorney General, and you describe what you've already started to nod to, slow walking these cases, and really noble intentions, I think, is where you land, but really disastrous consequences. Pick up the story, Aaron.
Sure. And to echo what Carol said, thank you all for coming, and thank you to Brad and to Politics and Prose. When we did write a first story in 2022, yes, about this topic of how long it had taken to get going in that investigation, some of the people
Can you all
inside
hear, by the way, in the back? Okay, great.
some of the people inside the department said, you don't understand how much of what came before impacted what came after. And so that is why the book starts where it starts in the last 2 years of the first Trump presidency. And it's at a point when Trump begins to put his finger on the scale and say something should happen as a criminal investigation is going underway. He says this person should be indicted, Andrew McCabe. And, so in that first part of the book, we're really working to try to help you understand what is the condition of the Department of Justice on the morning when the sun comes up on January 6th, and how much had been impacted and hollowed out inside that institution leading up to that day. And so there is almost like a pendulum swift. It's like a recoiling of everything that had been happening under the first Trump term. Garland comes in, and even before Garland comes in, Biden's temporary caretakers of the Department of Justice say, we are not going to do what he did and say you should investigate people. We're going to investigate a crime, and there's all these crimes on camera, at the Capitol. That's where we're going to start, and we're going to work our way up brick by brick from those, what we saw on camera, and we'll get there. We'll get to whoever was the most senior organizer of what happened that day. The problem was, there were kind of two things going on. There was all of the January 6th physical violence, but then there'd been also all of these efforts that were slightly aside from that, with the election interference efforts with fake electors and to overturn the election. And it really took a long time.
The problem also was the clock was ticking, right?
Right.
I mean, we were not standing still waiting. There was another presidential campaign starting to take shape in the wings as all this is going on.
Just to finish that thought, Garland gets in March, and he tells people at that time he thinks this bubble has burst, that the Trump fever is over, and he really never thinks at that point in time that there's ever going to be a problem with how much time we have to investigate this, that the country's never going to elect Donald Trump again. But even at that very moment, Trump is regaining power in Florida and going after people in the Senate who had, dared to think about voting against his impeachment.
Yeah. Going back to that clock ticking, an investigation does get underway. Two investigations get underway. There's the investigation into alleged election interference, and then there is the investigation underway into the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case. Those are rolling along, and then Merrick Garland hits the brakes in 2022 because the midterms are coming. Describe what the thinking was, and do people in the Justice Department today defend that decision?
Great question. So I'll nerd out, but I'll try to make this make sense. There's something called the 60-day rule. Some of you know it well. I look in this crowd, and I see a few of you that do. Justice Department has a rule, informal in some ways, that you do not take overt investigative steps that might affect an election in regards to a candidate. So you wouldn't start investigating Bob Menendez for possible bribery and start a search warrant of some property of his 60 days or 45 days or 20 days before an election in which he's a candidate. But what Merrick Garland did, because he was extremely, Caesar's wife, wanting to be so pristine about avoiding even the whiff of looking political, like the antidote essentially to Donald Trump's and Bill Barr's Justice Department, he decided they would invoke the 60-day rule, though Donald Trump was not a candidate. Prosecutors, when they learned that this was happening, were disturbed. Mary Louise asks the harder question. Both of these cases were frozen for 60 days, and it was, not exactly a great time to freeze the cases. In the classified documents case, they had all these records that they just retrieved from a surprise search at Mar-a-Lago. They wanted to interview Susie Wiles, who's now the White House Chief of Staff, because they had information that she had been with Trump on a plane and he had been waving around a top secret document, but they couldn't interview her during this 60-day period, so they had to pause. Anyway, long story short, this is part and parcel of Merrick Garland's, I think, noble intentions of being different, of not playing games, but prosecutors within the Justice Department were like, what are you thinking? Like, why would you be this careful when it's not even what the rule calls for?
To the second part of my question.
Anybody defending it?
Yeah, no, with the benefit of hindsight, which we all have now, and they didn't in the moment, but.
I have not, I've not had anybody say who was directly involved that they regret that choice. I've had a lot of people who respect Merrick Garland, who worked for him, say they regret that he made that choice.
Well, and to ask the devil's advocate question, what else could they have done? They were dealing with a former president who was making very clear he would like to return as president. They're dealing with the implications of investigating an American president, and it was important in the healing of our country to try to insulate probes from even the appearance of political interference.
Right. So what they didn't do, and they could have done differently in those first months, was that they assigned almost all the prosecutors to the riot cases. And, so they're dealing with what they see on camera, and then the next phase is to go to all the organized groups, the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, and to try to understand if they met the bar for a seditious conspiracy charge. And as all that's going on, there's no, the part we kept drilling in saying, really, nobody was assigned to look at these other things, the things that Trump said that day, the things that he had said, and we knew that it pushed the vice president to do things, and there just was not. There was not anyone assigned to that part of the investigation. Even in March 2021, a group called American Prosperity puts out a public records request, and they get from the National Archives these fake elector certificates that had been submitted by Republicans in different states. And that sits out there for another 13 months. And there's no FBI investigation into those until April of 2022. And when they open the FBI investigation in April 22, they cite those very documents that were released 13 months earlier as part of the justification for opening the probe. So we don't know what could have been done differently if they'd really gotten, taken a different tact from the very beginning.
And ultimately, the Supreme Court ended up weighing in and issuing this historic ruling, presidential immunity, that was last year, right, 2024. So much of this became moot. Fast forward to 2025, to this year, President Trump returns to the White House. Of the many developments that we have been attempting to track at the Justice Department in 2025, what stands out to you two?
Well,
I'll tell you.
There's a phrase that Mary Louise knows very well. The moment you put the pen down on the book, like you have to put the pen down at some point, you have to stop. And we had worked essentially on 2 to 3 books writing this one, so we really could not wait to put the pen down. But very soon after we turned in the full manuscript and it was being edited, we were going through fact-checking. Jim Comey was learning that he was in the middle of a grand jury investigation and likely to be indicted. And I've got to say that, to me, was a turning point. A lot of sources came to us who usually run away from us at parties. Justice Department officials don't like to talk about what they do, but they came to us in a way that I'm very honored and flattered, but they were trying to ring an alarm bell, and they warned that it would be this bad. Aaron and I were sitting in a room with a source who said, not many hours after the election, this place, pointing to the DOJ, this place is going to get shredded. And it was just as bad and worse than they predicted. And I think Comey was that moment. The idea that you could charge somebody based on evidence that career prosecutors have concluded is slim to non-existent.
You're describing that as the pivot moment. Was it a surprising moment? Given what had come before, it surprised you that Jim Comey was indicted?
Go ahead, Aaron.
I will say that the people we talked to for this book, as Carol said, this place is going to be shredded. They knew it then, but it's been so much worse than even they imagined. And that was the genie's out of the bottle kind of moment, because how do you step back from that? and and then when another politician, and now the threats of yet a third now in the works. I do have to agree that is probably one of the moments. There's also just this moment that we recount in the book that, even before that, that people realize this place is just different, and that is when Donald Trump goes to DOJ, and the backstory that's kind of nobody knew before until probably reading the book was that they planned to give him all back his boxes of things that they took out of Mar-a-Lago and make a big show of it at a press conference at DOJ and bring them up on stage. But then they had to delay the press conference because of a meeting with Zelensky. And so he says, I still want my boxes today. And they put him on Air Force One and fly him back to Mar-a-Lago. But he still goes to the DOJ the following week and holds a press conference. And they put up a big veneer of a facade behind him. They cover up all the statues of Lady Justice, and there's blue curtains. And the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, comes out and says, we're so lucky to work at the pleasure of the president at his direction. And people sitting granted, there was no staff invited to this press conference from DOJ, so they're sitting back in their offices or in other buildings, and like jaws drop. And there's some expletives in the book, because this is a moment when everybody's like, this is not what we came here to do. This is not our understanding of what we do as members of the Justice Department. In fact, it was so different compared to the way that Garland and Biden talked when they first came in, and really almost every other attorney general and president. Biden comes in and he says, points to Garland and says, you don't answer to me, you answer to the American people and the rule of law. And, when the building is dedicated, President Bush says basically the same thing. So there had been a march toward that. I think people realized that anything was possible.
So you two have described this book as an inside the room account of events of the last nearly a decade at the Justice Department, which prompts a question about how you write an inside the room account of a room that you were not inside.
We use the Bob Woodward method.
Describe the Bob Woodward method.
Well, I was trying to be funny because Bob was a great role model to me when I started at the Washington Post. And when I was going to write my first book, I asked Bob, could I come and, take you to coffee and learn a little bit about how you do the job? And of course, he invited me to his beautiful Georgetown mansion, and we had a catered lunch. And but I did learn a little bit about how he does what he does and how he can write a scene in a room. But really, it's just, I hate to say this, but it's a lot like being a prosecutor. And maybe that's why we jibe so well with some of these folks who at first were nervous to speak to us. Because what you're doing is you're asking somebody, I hear this happened. Is that your memory? Is that your recollection? And then you try to get consistency in those accounts. You don't gin it up. You ask people over and over again, what happened? What did you see? What did Merrick Garland say then? What happened when Cassidy Hutchinson testified and Merrick Garland was in the room and asked people, did we know about this? Did he really say that? And, when you consistently get people giving the same account, and as Aaron said to me a little earlier, especially when the two people don't like each other and they're on opposite sides of the table and they both agree that's what Merrick Garland said, or that's what Emile Beauvais said, or that's what Kash Patel said, you start to get a feeling of it. One of the pleas that I make when I interview people, Mary Louise has asked us a lot of questions about sources earlier today. One of the pleas I make is the most basic human request. If you don't tell me, the American people are not going to find out. I need your help. We don't know each other. I know you don't have to trust me. I want to build trust with you, but honestly, if you don't help me explain this, something really important is going to be lost, and we're not going to be able to share it with the public, and they need to know. And weirdly, that has a really good batting average. People in this institution, I'm sorry, I'm talking too long, I'll stop.
No,
Not at all. I was going to say, I'm persuaded. I want to tell you everything now. I'm in.
You already got me earlier, though.
Carol and I sat down in a restaurant with somebody that we hadn't ever spoken to us before, and we're 10 or 15 minutes in, and I'm only ordering coffee, he says, this is, and I can tell he does not want to be sitting there. And Carol, you can tell he's uncomfortable, probably ready to leave. Carol makes this, it's your moment for history to tell us what happened. Next thing you know, we're eating lunch. We're there for 4 more hours. And, that happened more than once.
A lot of lunches in y'all's reporting. I love it. It sounds like part of it is also just you're calling, and then you're calling the next person, then you're calling. Like you interviewed how many people for this book?
More than 200. I want to say it's like 240, 250.
Mm-hmm.
And that's 2 solid years of interviews. That's going back to folks again and again. It was a very iterative process.
Not to make light of the situation at the Justice Department, as I said at the outset, I don't think the stakes could be higher. But if you were looking for a silver lining to the turmoil that is unfolding there and the churn of people leaving or being forced to leave, is it that more people are willing and able to take your call?
I'm sorry, you mean the people that have already left?
I mean, people who are now outside the administration and a little bit more free to speak and tell you what's they witnessed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there is an estimate out there right now that 4,000 FBI agents and federal prosecutors have left the Department of Justice since January 20th. And some
4,000 since January 20th, this January 20th.
Right. And remember, that's not just people being called into a room and fired or told, like all of the entire FBI leadership was told the day Kash Patel was testifying that nobody would be fired. They were all told they would be fired. This is different than that. It's people who took the voluntary fork in the road, whatever the hell that was, and others that just said, this is not for me anymore. I can't work here. I have really been struck by how many people are hanging on who feel that their values and their calling to this wonderful institution is in danger. I'm kind of amazed that many people are holding on with their fingernails because they feel that they could be of value to the rebuilding of this institution.
Just one last question on this, and understanding that you can't share any conversations that may have been on background or off the record, but I am curious whether the current leadership of the DOJ was interested in engaging with you. I'm sure that you did what I do when I'm reporting a story and I'm getting crumbs from people outside, and then I finally will go to the press shop at wherever, CIA is usually who I'm calling, and say, I've got this thing. Can you confirm it? Can you give me any context? Would you steer me away from it? And we go from there. Has the Justice Department engaged with some of the stuff you turned up in this book? Do they care whether this is right, whether it's accurate? Are they interested in helping you make it a stronger account of what really is happening?
I think, to the point raised earlier about when we had to put the pen down, those first 100 days were pretty fluid inside the department. There was not the same kind of hierarchy and practiced press operation that they're starting to form now. But in general, we have taken things to the current administration, to the current leadership. And, whereas under, for the past 2 years of our reporting, we would usually say, here's what we've got. And then it would lead sometimes to days and days of back and forth and trying to explain the context. And, they can't always tell us if we're right or wrong because it would be releasing information about an investigation, but they, would kind of try to keep giving more and more to, to subtly push you off a point or push you another way. The most frequent response we've gotten from the current administration is this is fake news and we're not going to dignify this with a response.
So what are the implications? What are the consequences of the record you have compiled here? And another way of asking that, how profound, how lasting is the damage to the Justice Department?
There are 2 critical ways that Aaron and I feel and have heard so many times consistently from our sources, 2 ways in which the Department of Justice has been leveled, and it is a danger for Americans. One is centuries worth of expertise out the door. And that, we've been warned, means we're more vulnerable to a terror attack. George Toscas, day one after the inauguration, one of the most senior national security supervisors, ran every counterintelligence probe, oversaw mid-year exam, the investigation of Hillary Clinton, the 3 investigations of Donald Trump, but so many more terrorism plots before that. We're more dangerous. We are less safe. There is no, to quote one wonderful FBI source, there is no imaginary force field around America. It is these people that are keeping us safe, and now we are less so. The second damage is the credibility of the Department of Justice. You know, Donald Trump weakened it. We didn't say this at the beginning, and we should have. He weakened, but Brad helped us say it. He weakened it so much more than we realized in his first presidency. He scarred and terrorized individual agents and investigators. Their careers were harmed, and they became more fearful. Well, now you don't know, even if there's a new president, different party, who is going to trust that the criminal charges that party brings and the next Department of Justice, who's going to believe that's not politically motivated now that you have Donald Trump ordering up investigations and grand jury probes and indictments? Who's going to believe that this institution is clean as a whistle and free of politics?
So just to follow up a story that I know you have been out front on, Carol, to give one concrete example, Border Chief Tom Homan. Describe just the story that I think you broke about cash and what the potential implications are of investigating or not investigating something like that down the road.
Well, I mean, Kash Patel and Emil Bove were both briefed on that investigation in January and February of 2025. We're in 2025, right?
Yeah.
Poor Aaron and I have lost our sense of years, and so has our family. They're both briefed on it, and
And just describe what it is for people who haven't followed the story.
In September of 2024, the FBI was in the middle of an undercover investigation of contractors that might be engaged in seeking to pay bribes. And when they met one of the people that they had targeted as a likely conduit for bribes, he recommended to the undercover agents that they meet with Tom Homan and pay him $1 million, and they'd get a ton of contracts if they did. This person kept saying over and over again, he was a business associate of Tom Homan's, and he kept saying, you really need to meet Tom, you need to pay Tom, you can get contracts in the next administration if you do. And so the undercover agents were like, okay, well, we now have to open up an investigation of Tom Homan. They met with him in I should be careful on what I say. They met with him in a location in Dallas, and they brought bags of cash, and Tom Homan took $50,000 in a kava bag, and it's been recorded, so this evidence still exists, and his intermediary, the cutout, took $10,000 in cash at that point. Anyway, when Emil Bove, the acting deputy attorney general, and the FBI director, Kash Patel, are briefed on this case, they are very chilly to it, and they basically say, we got some questions about the predicate here, which is hard because they've got recordings of the guy taking money and implying that he's going to do something for it in terms of future contracting for these individuals that are posing as business officials. And Kash Patel shuts the case down in August of 2025, which is not very long after that. A source reached out to me to tell me about it.
Yeah, it's an instructive example of what could happen if allies of this president or a future president are implicated in behavior and how the Justice Department might proceed.
And just to say 2 sentences more, we tell the story in our book of inside the room, because there were a lot of people we talked to make sure it was consistent about the pressure on prosecutors in New York to drop the case against Mayor Eric Adams, in which they also had copious evidence and no fewer than, let me count, 8 different public integrity prosecutors resigned rather than comply with the order to dismiss that case because it was so strong. But Donald Trump wanted it dismissed because not an ally, but somebody he could use.
In just a minute, I'm going to open it for y'all's questions, and so start thinking about them. We have a microphone, one microphone, one microphone. So we're going to form a queue here in a second. But Aaron, while people are thinking about that, I want you to take on this question of what you see as the stakes of the situation that you're chronicling at the Justice Department.
Well, on the on the brain drain part, there's the inside the 7th floor of the Hoover building, FBI building. There's this conference room where every morning the FBI director goes in to get his morning report, and there's a series of those meetings. But the biggest one, there's about 35 chairs around this kind of U-shape, big screen in the back, and big wooden doors with FBI insignia on the front, and inside there, and any morning, is people who have been in the bureau and government service for decades, and bringing all to bear everything they know. We would get annoyed in the process of reporting this book out and the stories before it, trying to get people's attention sometime, being like, "This is such a huge story. Why didn't they do more?" And to be like, do you know how many things we're working on every given day, and how many active threats we are engaging with and worried about? And, that really, in their mind, sometimes would say, what you're talking about is like 1% of what we do. That the whole Trump investigation was not taking up the majority of the bandwidth of the FBI director and others for those years. But that table where there were 30-some people, there's now like single digits of people who have been there over the long term, and career civil servants who moved their way up through. That entire class of people as executive assistant directors were gone. And it was at the end of the book, we recount how summarily almost all dismissed. So that's a real problem for all of our security. I do see from the conversations we've had that there's we're at a pivot point where there's going to be less certainty that the cases are being brought for the right reason and being investigated fairly, and that they're fully based on evidence. We're just entering this area of a concern about injustice where politics and prosecutions are mixed. And to your original question of how do we get out of this, it's a really big dilemma, because what does the next administration do that comes into power? If it's a Democrat, do they keep Kash Patel as their FBI director? Let him serve out the remainder of his 10-year term? Or do they bring in somebody else? And obviously there's going to be a push by many to bring in somebody else. But if you do that, then they have done what the last administration did, and then it makes that FBI director position a political appointee, and it doesn't make it an independent position. Same thing with all of the people who have now been brought up through the ranks of DOJ. Some we report in the book were given loyalty tests on their first day. Did you support Donald Trump? Did you ever give any money to a Democrat? Those people it's not a meritocracy right now, and it's loyalty is a big driver in how people are getting promoted by our reporting. So does the next administration come in and try to figure out who was brought in and, for the right reasons, and who, just signed the loyalty test and try to purge? And then you've further eroded the civil servants, and there are people just in the bowels of that place who have for years looked at the law, looked at the facts, and said, we prosecute or we don't. And that's just where it's going to be a long time to figure out how we get back to that place.
I mean, just before I open it to questions, give us some hope. Is there anything good that you discovered at the Justice Department, or anything that suggests that, okay, it's been shaken, but it's still standing, there are really good people there, the rule of law remains?
Okay, without identifying this person, Aaron and I have been obsessive, and I want to give Aaron more credit because he's been a lot more technologically savvy than me. We've been absolutely crazy about protecting our sources and all of our notes and the way we connect with people to be sure that even
That's
if
enough information about that.
oh my God, totally to type. I'll just say we've taken a lot of steps. My lawyer told me not to answer any more questions about that. But a source, we wanted to touch base with some people, obviously, before the book published, just to see how they are doing. We took a lot of names out of this book because we didn't want people to be fired. Like literally, like some of these scenes are so awkward because there's like a human talking, but we don't want them to get fired, so we take their name out. So anyway, I was checking in with a few of them, and one of them said, I'm holding on here. I'm holding on because I want this place to return to what it was, and I'm going to try my damnedest to stay. And that gives me hope, because Aaron has said this so much better than I have in the past. The people who work at the Department of Justice it's a calling. They could get great jobs and make $1 million+ a year in a law firm, probably more than that. And they love going into court and saying, Aaron Davis here for the United States of America. And that's the honor of their lives. And their shared values are about bringing cases when they have the evidence and when there's a public interest. And neither of those things are met, they don't do it. And that's a pretty rigorous and ethical person, and they're still there.
Over to you. Your questions. Microphone right here. If we want to line up, some brave soul go first. If you could keep your question reasonably short, please, and keep it an actual question, that would be great.
Carol, we met at REI upstairs in Rockville a number of years ago.
Well, don't tell my husband what I bought.
The documents have been returned to Trump. To the extent that he's still holding them.
Can you just speak directly into the mic?
to the-
We're live streaming this. I want everybody to be able to hear.
To the
Thank
extent
you.
he is still holding them in 2029, if nothing has changed the legality of that, what are your thoughts on the possibility of a new administration prosecuting him for that?
So of course, you ask a question that is going to be slightly embarrassing to me, because I want to be clear that I don't believe we know that he took a box of tons of top secret records. I believe that he made a very big PR show that he was getting everything back. And maybe that was Melania's underwear that he said was taken, and maybe that was like the magazines, the Time magazine stuff. I mean, I'm making a little bit of a joke, but he took some boxes, not as many as were called away by the FBI in their Ryder vans when they left Mar-a-Lago at 4 p.m. on August 8th, 2022. So I don't know that he really does have top secret records.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Come on, it's your
Don't
chance.
be shy.
Given what you have reported on the undermining of the Justice Department, especially what has been happening since President Trump has come back to office, since the rule of law requires a certain trust and respect for the institutions that are either responsible for prosecuting crimes or adjudicating them, how do we get back to that place?
Well, I will say, there are a lot of people we've talked to who are no longer in the administration, no longer in the government service, but have said to us, I would go back in a heartbeat. I'd go back to it was much the way that people ran back to try to turn upright the apple cart after Trump's first term. And, people who have a lot of institutional knowledge said, I want to go back and do everything I can. And I think you would probably see an effort like that again. There's also, there's this guy, Bruce Swartz, who is a long-time kind of icon inside the Department of Justice. And he was in charge of, anytime the Department of Justice had to interact with another law enforcement agency in another country, and with extradition treaties and all kinds of things. And he would go around and speak, and sometimes they had these kind of rule of law conferences with other countries, and people around him would they'd all be tasked with assessing each of the countries' rule of law and their independence. And sometimes people would look at the delegation with Schwartz and others and be like, on paper you don't actually have an independent justice system. It reports to the President of the United States. I guess I wouldn't discount the possibility of some kind of reform in the future to make it not fully responsible to the White House.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah, my question is very related to what you're already discussing. I think an advanced country, advanced economies, and a democracy is characterized by institutions, the strength of institutions. The problem you have described is there are two states. There is the state with the rule of law, something like that. And then there could be an alternative state. How it is possible that there are no check and balances that avoid this cycle, not political cycle, to prevail over institutions, right? There should be democratic institutions, right? There should be check and balances, right? There should be rule of law, should be prevalent, right? So otherwise, like, as you said, then we go to the next cycle, and then that cycle determines something else, right? So it's like there is no certainty, there are no institutions.
So, I mean, the simple answer is the founders imagined checks and balances in the three branches of government.
Exactly.
But that's not working out so great because Congress is not doing anything about things that normally would have offended them.
Yeah.
Russian interference in our elections, taxation imposed by the executive rather than having it be the actual domain of Congress. And the judiciary has made a lot of decisions that clear the way for Donald Trump to really do whatever he wants. So those checks and balances exist. They're just not working so great right now. Sorry.
Or maybe you need new reforms.
Thank you.
Thank you for your reporting and for your book. I think we've all been wondering for years how this all could have gone so wrong. So it's great to be able to get this insight. There's an aspect of it that I'm particularly curious about. I ran an investigative reporting program in Georgia and covered all the fake elector stuff in real time, was in the room with Rudy Giuliani and all those crackpot meetings, when they were, and uncovered, we actually saw the fake electors things going around and got all the emails of these people from the various states coordinating all of this. We reported that, and it was reported in other states at the time, well, within months, weeks, months. How did the Justice Department, with this information out there, not go after it? And I understand the caution, but it wasn't for lack of evidence. They had one crime scene at the Capitol that they were investigating, and they certainly knew about the fake electors stuff. Why, do you have any insight into why that part of it wasn't being investigated when they also had? We
do.
Okay, thanks. I'll shut up. Great, good.
I mean, we have an answer. I don't know if it's going to be satisfactory, but the top-down approach that was happening under the first Trump term of the president or the political appointees taking an active role in how investigations were playing out, Garland wanted to pivot, go back, and Garland was actually the guy who wrote some of the rules in a thing called the Federal Principles of Prosecution that became the Bible inside DOJ after Watergate about the separation between the White House and DOJ, and so part of so he recoils from that, but there's I'm trying to think if I was going to go back. Sorry, I had a thought.
I'm going to step in a second to say something quickly.
Go.
Go.
So part of this process of going back to all the norms was to let these cases bubble up from the bottom. And, in this vein, then, you had the people who had been at DOJ for a long time making decisions about cases. This is not a case, as we understand it, that was ever decided inside the Attorney General's office. It was decided inside something called the Public Integrity Section. And this was the group that was formed in the wake of Watergate. Now, why exactly the folks in Penn didn't feel they wanted to go forward with this, I still don't feel like I fully understand that. We've heard different things, but we never got to a point where we could write inside the book exactly why not. But they did punt, and they let the estate go first. And the Attorney General never second-guessed them.
The only thing I'd add is buy the book so you can read the story of Waleska McClellan, a little-known investigator in the National Archives who in December of 2020 is looking at, Aaron and I are both like, I cannot believe we found this out. She is looking at all the fake elector documents, and she's like, this is clearly coordinated. This is like rinky-dink. They all look the same. These people signed their names and said that Trump won in these swing states. They're Republican Party officials. Something is extremely hinky/criminal about this. She asks the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. to look into it. And during the middle of the riot investigation, right, January 8th, 2 days later, DOJ turns her down and says, we just don't think there's a crime here.
Thank you.
Just a little tease. You got to get the book to get the rest.
You mentioned protecting your sources and going to great lengths to do that. When you interviewed past or present or current DOJ employees, did you find a fear for personal safety or job futures which are greater than what you previously experienced in your past research for other books?
Go for it.
Yeah, some of the stories that people would go back to on our sources, the day after the raid at Mar-a-Lago, FBI becomes a target. Donald Trump says in a series of social media posts, I can't believe what this FBI is doing. I can't believe this ever happened to an American citizen, let alone a U.S. president. And a couple days after that, a man attacks a FBI office with a gun shoots a nail gun. That's what I'm trying to think of. Yeah, nail gun. Tries to go through the bulletproof glass. That night, Donald Trump also and his campaign start talking about the agents who had been involved with the raid at Mar-a-Lago, and conservative media start publicizing some of those documents that are usually filed in court, and they're redacted in court. But this particular set left at Mar-a-Lago has the names of the actual agents who are involved with the raid, which, if it didn't come out from FBI, it came out from the people that you leave a copy of that at Mar-a-Lago. That night, it's in the book, that night those agents had to be whisked away from their homes to hotels and safe houses. They are under threat. They feel under threat. And, I think it does extend, certainly all the professional threats of losing your job and your livelihood. Our friends, our neighbors, they're all going through this right now.
Thank you. All right, well, we've got two more in the queue. Yes, sir.
Yes, I was wondering if you had seen anything about, after January, any major changes in the number of investigations taken or cases started or indictments or any of the other metrics which you would judge the effectiveness of these agencies in the DOJ.
Thank you.
I can't give you, really good hard numbers. All I can do is give you anecdotes from sources who we've stayed in touch with, obviously. And one example is the office I used to cover a lot, the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. It's one of the two most important ones in the country. They've lost their criminal chief, their deputy criminal chief, the three people that ran national security cases, three supervisors, I should say. I was told by a source recently that almost everyone in their office, which is a different office, is looking for a job because they can't work for this particular appointee and acting U.S. attorney that Donald Trump installed. They're afraid that they'll be asked to bring charges against someone that they don't think are justified. And they do have a duty of candor to the court. And if you don't believe that this is reasonable, you can't step into court and do it, in their view. I mean, honestly, thank goodness that they feel that way.
I also thank you for your book. I've read a little bit of it. I just can't wait to, I just want to read it like a novel.
Could you get closer to the
Yeah.
mic?
Yep. Nothing important. Nothing important. Do you see a means within the courts to hold Donald Trump to 2 terms? That was the question you didn't want.
I don't think that chapter's in the book, is that? It's in the Constitution. So, a means, I mean, obviously, these things are tested. He takes everything, obviously, to a place that nobody expected. I don't have a good answer, Carol. You stumped me.
Let me reframe the question. How much trouble could Jack Smith cause if he were so inclined?
I'm also going to let Aaron take that one.
Well, we report in the book about the full volume about the election interference case that's out there, and that is even less than it used to be because of the immunity ruling at the court. There's a volume that you all probably know of similarly that recounts their full investigation in the classified documents case, and that has remained sealed by the judge who threw out the case. There are more details. There's more color. There's more of a narrative than we've probably ever heard before about how that investigation unfolded, about how much evidence there really was that actually goes back to text messages and people's recollections inside the White House about the day before the attorney for the president goes in to search the room with all the boxes. The president sends a message saying to move those boxes, and then they move back, but there's fewer boxes than there were that went out. And so there is more to learn on all of that. There's also just something that we've lost in all of this, even on the election interference side. But I hope people realize in reading the book is that they had a trial plan on the election interference case. And when the Supreme Court made its ruling saying that there's this whole zone of official acts that you cannot challenge, there was a 100-page document that they basically had to go back in Jack Smith's office and start redlining everything that they could no longer bring as evidence. And there were things in there that nobody's ever heard about. There was a meeting in March 2020 before the pandemic when he's briefed on all the improvements in election security, and he says, this is great. We should have a press conference about how great the election security is going to be in 2020. And Jack Smith had people inside that room who were going to recount that. But as the pandemic goes on, as there's more mail-in voting, and his internal poll numbers start to really change, Donald Trump takes a very different tone and tune about how good election security is in 2020. So there's a narrative that we've already lost, and there's more we could still gain on the classified document side.
I will just close by saying thank you. Y'all are doing some of the hardest reporting that is being done in Washington these days and some of the most important. So thank you for your work and for putting it all in a book so that we can all read it and try to keep up with you. Thank you.